Hello there, I am Scott Telek, author of the Swithen series of Arthurian novels, the only series that remains completely faithful to the real legends of King Arthur as laid down between the years 1136 and 1485. I'm taking 25 novels to tell the full Arthurian legend in all the scope and majesty it deserves, and we're 1/5 of the way there right now, and I'm about to release book 6 of this series, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about right now. So this book covers the first few years of King Arthur's reign, including some of his major battles. If you've been following the series, you know the first book began with the birth of Merlin, and we had a lot of drama leading up into the birth of Arthur, and then we went and we followed until Arthur pulled the sword from the stone and was finally crowned king. And if you've read Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, this book roughly covers the material in chapter 1, although I'm layering back in a lot of stories that Malory left out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the cover looks like this, and it's called Gifts with Hard Swords. It's called that because at the beginning, Arthur comes to bring gifts of armor and jewels to the kings that want to make war on him. And they say, we don't want any gifts from a beardless boy. Instead, we'll come to bring you gifts with hard swords between the neck and shoulders. And that's a phrase from Le Morte d'Arthur that I took and borrowed to be the title here, because it's such a wonderful phrase. So the last 2 books of my series, number 4 and 5, were mostly original and made up by me, but in this one we're getting back into the legendary material. And if you know my series, you know that I have to remain completely faithful to the Arthurian material written between the years of 1136 and 1485. And the reason for that is so we don't get lost in some of the flights of fancy that happen in some later Arthurian books, and we're also not trying to fix what the medieval writers put down. So if you watched any of my videos about how the Arthurian legend was written, you know that Le Morte d'Arthur is a very shortened condensation of a much longer version of the Arthurian legend that was laid down 200 years before. In my book series, I'm weaving back in a lot of the stories that were left out. So you'll be getting new stories that are from the original medieval legend, but were left out of its most famous telling and the way most of us know it today. The first of these stories that Malory left out is that of the woman known as the false Guinevere. This is an identical twin of the woman who goes on to become the queen, and she's going to play a very important part of the story going forward, totally filled with intrigue and scandal and lots of action. Her story starts in this book, and ultimately there are so few stories that revolve around Guinevere that I'm really excited to feature that in this book and give her and Guinevere a bigger place than they normally have. The other thing is that this book features our first major scenes with Guinevere herself. She does meet Arthur, and their romance does get started in this book, but she also has her own intrigue and scandals and her own storyline that has nothing to do with him at all. And then there's King Arthur himself. When we left Arthur, he had just been crowned king, and in this book, the other kings of the country are going to make war on him because they don't want to hand the rule of the country over to a 15-year-old boy. I really wanted us to understand that Arthur is only 15 and he's a teenager having to deal with all the stress of suddenly taking on the rule of the country. The other thing is he's seeing his friends and family be killed in battle, battles that they're fighting for him, and he suddenly has to manage all the stress of being king. I'm really trying to make these characters feel like real people and not just the blank heroic archetypes we usually have in King Arthur stuff. So it's great when I get reviews from readers that say things like, I've never really related to King Arthur until now. In this one, he's a real person with real flaws. In this book, Arthur is also having to really deal with Merlin, and finding out that Merlin can be really, really frustrating. In the old legends, Merlin isn't exactly the kindly old wizard we're led to believe, and he's constantly berating Arthur and telling him how disappointed he is. Arthur's also having to deal with the fact that Merlin essentially created him in order for him to live out this life that he's predetermined, and Arthur isn't even sure he wants to do that. So those two definitely have a lot of butting heads to do in learning to work together. So also, you see on the cover one of the most iconic moments of all in the Arthurian legend, when Arthur receives the sword Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake. It's cool because in this series you get to see how all those moments fit into the larger story and what they mean to everyone. So it's not just cool image, we show what it means to the mythos and why it's so important. Speaking of that, in this book we have the first extended sequences of Arthurian mysticism, and by that I mean when characters enter a reality-adjacent dream world that goes on for quite a while, where nothing really makes sense but it all seems kind of real. This is, I think, one of the things completely unique to the King Arthur legend, and in King Arthur it remains a little bit reined in and subtle, but it still carries a kind of poetic resonance that has a lot of meaning. I'm really trying to retain that weirdness and mystery in my novels, which is a key reason I'm trying to remain completely faithful to the medieval writing and not trying to fix it and make it palatable for modern audiences. Two characters that are glimpsed in Le Morte d'Arthur but have a much larger presence in the larger legend are King Ban and King Bors. Their importance to the overall saga is so massive that I can't believe Sir Thomas Malory left them out. But I actually think he did it because their influence on the overall saga would be so big that it would create an entirely new stand he'd have to manage. Their story, and especially that of their descendants, will have a humongous impact in my series, and it begins here in book 6, and will go all the way to the very last book of the series. Because this book begins the story of Arthur as king, and is the beginning of the King Arthur story that most people are familiar with, this book is actually a great place if you want to jump into the series midstream. You can pick it up without having to know a lot of the past, and there won't be a lot of confusion, although people who have been with the series from the start will know all the complicated backstories of the people in it, and what it means that they're all now in the same room. In fact, that's one of the coolest things about this book, is that all the separate storylines we've been following now weave together into one, and we're going to follow these characters all the way through to book 25. But if you do just want to jump in at the beginning of the King Arthur story, it's easy to do that here without too much confusion, and you can always go back if you're interested to know the history. Alrighty, that's a little overview of what to expect in Gifts with Hard Swords, the Swithen Book 6. I hope you're interested to check it out, check out some of the other books in the series, and keep on going all the way to book 25. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you later.